welcome to Peter Grant Goes Graphic, Creating the Rivers of London Comic Books, a free LIBCON West at Home panel organized by the Glendale Public Library. My name is Anna Caggiano. I work here at the library, and because I've been a fan of the Rivers of London series since the first book was published, I organized this live panel, which will also be available as a recorded video within about 2 weeks at www.libconwest.org and the library's website at www.glendaleazlibrary.com, and I'll put those links in the chat. To all our attendees, thank you so much for being here. We encourage you to submit questions for our panelists in the chat. And what a fantastic lineup of panelists it is who are generously sharing their time with us today. We are so excited to present the creative minds behind the latest comic book spin-off of the Rivers of London novels, namely Volume 8, The Fae and the Furious. I'm going to get things started by introducing our moderator, who will then introduce our panelists and kick things off. Our moderator today is Chantelle Aimée Osman, the editor of Agora, an imprint of Polis Books, which focuses on crime fiction with unique social and cultural themes. Agora's titles have been nominated for many awards and appeared on multiple best-of lists. The former editor-in-chief of RT Book Reviews magazine and a freelance editor, she is an instructor at the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing in Tempe, Arizona, plus authors at large and Lit Reactor. Chantelle has written short fiction as well as a nonfiction series on writing and was named a Publishers Weekly Rising Star honoree in 2020. Most importantly, she's also a big fan of the Rivers of London series. Welcome and thank you, Chantelle. I'm turning over the proceedings to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. Anna and I used to go to a lot of plays together, but I moved to New York and haven't seen her for many years. And she said, oh my God, I have to tell you, I'm putting this panel together. And I remembered how you would rave about the Rivers of London series. And would you mind? I said, are you kidding? Would I mind? I'm thrilled. So I'm equally grateful to Anna for inviting me here today. And I will introduce the rest of our illustrious panelists. First, we have the internationally best-selling author, Ben Aaronovitch.
Yay!
Born and raised in London, he had the sort of unrelentingly uninteresting childhood that drives a person to drink or to science fiction. The latter proved useful in his early career when he wrote for Doctor Who before it was fashionable, Casualty and the cheapest soap opera ever made, Jupiter Moon. Alas, his career foundered in the late 1990s and he was forced to go out and work for a living. It was while running the crime and science fiction sections at the Covent Garden branch of Waterstones that he conceived the notion of writing novels instead. Thus was the Rivers of London series born, and when the first book, Midnight Riot, proved to be a runaway success, he waited all of 5 minutes to give up his day job and return to the bliss that is a full-time writing career. He still lives in the city that he modestly calls the capital of the world, and says he will leave when they pry London from his cold, dead fingers. He promises that he is already hard at work on the next Peter Grant novel and not computer games. Honest. We welcome Ben. Next, we have Andrew Cartmel, the co-author of the comics. Andrew was born in London, grew up in Canada, and returned to the UK to complete his education. He was the script editor, in these days practically the showrunner, on Doctor Who for 3 influential seasons before working on Casualty and Dark Knight. Other television commissions include scripts for Torchwood and Midsummer Murders. He has written plays which have been performed in London, plus a series of crime novels about the Vinyl Detective, a jazz-loving record collector turned sleuth, as well as touring as a stand-up comedian and writing for the website London Jazz News. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Next is Lee Sullivan, the illustrator. Lee trained as a wildlife and technical illustrator, then worked as a graphic artist before joining the comics industry in 1988. The many titles he has worked on include Transformers, Doctor Who, Marvel UK, The Amulet of Samarkand. He was also created cover art for Roxy Music's Andy Mackay and performed with the Roxy Music Tribute Band. So we welcome Lee.
Thank you.
Then we have Paulina Vasileva, the colorist. She's based in London, and her favorite themes are fantasy, the dreamy, and the intriguing, with a hint of ambivalence and a touch of the sensual. She is making 2 graphic novels, Fantasies of the Enchanted Window and Svedanka, which I hope I pronounced correct. So welcome, Paul. And also, just for those of you who notice, her artwork is behind her as well. So welcome, everybody. And I think after these long bios, that's probably all everybody needs to know, right? We're good? Call it here?
Chantelle, I have a quick question. You guys when you used to go to all these plays together, was that in California?
Arizona, actually.
Oh, wow. Well, so there's
Yeah.
a thriving dramatic culture there. That's fabulous.
Well, I think that thriving might be reaching a bit, but there is some. There are places to be found if
Good.
one looks very hard for them.
Good to know. Good to know.
Between the cactuses.
Yes, exactly.
And if anybody wants to put a bid in on that artwork by Pau, I'm sure she's open to offers.
That's wonderful. And also, before I do forget, and Anna said this as well, but for those of you listening, please feel free to put questions in the chat for us to ask. I've prepared some, but I'm really hoping to get them from the audience because that's, of course, what we're all here for. So actually, one of my favorite, in doing just a little bit of research before this panel, I saw that Andrew has been in on the Peter Grant series with Ben basically from the beginning, having had the initial chapters, I'm told, read to him over the phone.
No, that's not quite right. Could it be a very difficult and prolonged way of doing it? Ben and I used to talk constantly about what he was doing and what he was writing. Then he'd much more sanely email me the chapters. I would use track changes, and then we might discuss them on the phone again afterwards.
So this has been a partnership that's, in some sense, an inspirational partnership from the beginning of the Rivers of London series. And one of my favorite little factoids that I found was that apparently, Ben, originally you wanted the title to be Magic Cops.
No, I didn't want the couple to be Magic Cops. The title was Magic Cops, and we sat there going, oh God, I can't call it Magic Cops. What, it's bloody Magic Cops. And it almost up until the point of publication, it was Magic Cops. And then
any regrets on not going with Magic Cops?
Because it's a terrible title. I mean, it's a very, does what it says on the tin type of title. And then Andrew said, let's go. Why don't you call it Rivers of London? I said, that's terrible. I can't think of anything better. That's the title. So that's the title we went with, Rivers of London. And then for some reason, they decided to change it in America because, I don't know, they didn't like London or rivers. They thought it was too wet.
I wonder if it would have actually had a different audience if it had been called Magic Cops. I think that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I try not to think about these things.
I don't know if Ben is touchy about this, but I always thought Midnight Riot was a terrible title, not least because there is no riot at midnight in the book.
Yes. Literally, they can't call it Rivers of London. And I literally took a list of words on one side and words and just went down the list going, Midnight Dog, Midnight Fish, Midnight Riot. And finally, Midnight Riot was the least bad thing I came up with. And then I sent it off to them and they called it Midnight Riot and gave it a terrible cover. And I haven't forgiven them. Ever.
The cover the first two were terrible.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, and somebody in the chat just went exactly to the place that my mind did. These are great, awful band names. If nothing else, I would go see Magic Cops perform. I don't know about you.
I quite like Midnight Dog as a title band. In fact, I may put a band in the next book called Midnight Dog.
I think that would be wonderful. So in the initial stages of this, I know that we'll get to the actual graphic novels, but do you tend to write very visually? Like, was this something that you were very obviously, you love London and were inspired by all of the things by London, but to translate something that was prose into a graphic novel, I feel like there had to be a strong visual connection to begin with that kind of inspired that.
The visual aspect is like graphic novels are a very visual medium. So you if you're going to do a graphic novel, you have to do something very visual. The important thing to do is always know what media you are writing in. Are you writing a script? Are you writing a graphic novel? Are you writing a book? And if I'm writing a graphic novel, I'm thinking, what does it look like? What are the images of it like? Is this an exciting and fun image? When I'm writing a book, it's much more what are the sound of the phrases, how do the phrases roll off the page? How do you read them off the page? It's a very different kind of thing. One of the advantages of being long in the tooth and having quite a long, slightly unsuccessful career, doing quite a lot of things unsuccessfully, is that I know the difference between the various media. A lot of people, they start in one media and then they go over to another and they have a bit of a transition. But because literally my transition was invisible because it happened, nothing got published. So all my transitions were invisible. So I made all my mistakes sort of at the kind of like the invisible stage. And so therefore, when it came time to write a graphic novel, I not only had a better idea of what I was doing than I would have had like 20 years ago, but also I had Andrew, so he would just go, no, it doesn't work, don't do that.
We should also remember that Ben was primarily a scriptwriter. He turned to writing novels out of desperation. He's a great novelist, but before that, he was the best screenwriter in the country, and his scripts are always highly visual.
Yeah, they're very visual scripts.
I was going to ask if you felt that having that background in script writing ended up being an advantage when you come to graphic novels, because there's so much less prose involved.
Graphic novels is the most fun as a writer, and it's the easiest writing you will possibly do, because as you write a script, it's actually it's not a blueprint, it's a sort of recipe, and it has to sell the basic concept, and it has to make people see pictures in their head when they write it, when they read it, so that they can then sell it to money men, and they, the actors can understand what they're doing. And novels, obviously, it's just, you have to do everything in a novel, right? But in a graphic novel, you're basically doing the least possible amount of work for the maximum amount of buck, because along comes Lee. Lee has to come along and go, make it look exciting. You just write, Nightingale comes in looking imposing. He has to make Nightingale look imposing. I don't have to do anything. I just write, Nightingale looks imposing. Bit of dialogue, bish bash bosh, off you go. Right, Lee has to come in, then the colorist has to make it look good, and it's like, I don't have to do anything. It's great. It's the easiest writing you can possibly do in terms of actually like putting one word after another.
If you know what you're doing, screenwriters who turn into comic book writers often have a problem that they write about things that take place over time, whereas every panel is a frozen piece of time. It's a snapshot. Yeah. And screenwriters,
that's the key. I mean, Andrew taught me that. He was the one because he wrote some comics for Doctor Who. And he was a big fan of Alan Moore, and I was a big fan of Alan Moore. But you see, Alan Moore script is an impenetrable mass. But he kind of boiled Alan Moore down to kind of like the basics of Alan Moore, and he went, you do this, because he's lazy like me and didn't want to write too much. And so that's where I learned how to do, freeze frames and you can do so many fun things in graphic novels that you can't do in other media, like counterpart points and dramatic irony, where you have one person way saying one thing. And weirdly, I have little Alan Moore and Andrew Cartmel vignettes in my head that kind of like are little shortcuts for various types of counterpoint, and the sort of dramatic irony I have, there she is as pretty as a picture. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm referring to, that in Watchmen, where you have like this dripping statue and the line is, there she is as pretty as a picture. And of course the dialogue is coming from in California, but the image is from New York, with this like funeral, this wet funeral in New York. And when I learned you could do stuff like that, it was like, yeah, I'm gonna do stuff like that. And then, but you have to get people like Lee and empowered to do it, otherwise you're stuffed, otherwise it's just kind of words on a page.
One thing Ben is particularly good at and loves is what he calls art shifts, where the comic is all drawn in basically in Lee's style, but sometimes he'll say, can you do something like in the style of R. Crumb and make it look like a 1960s underground comic? So we were just before we came on today, we were talking about those panels that he had done, and that's something that is uniquely comics, graphic novels.
And that's a lot of fun too.
Well, is it? Let's ask Lee. Is it a lot of fun to do that?
No, it's terrible. I hated every moment of it. No, it was great, because you do have to work in generally one style. So if there's this lovely moment where the script opens up and you have to do in a different style, it's fantastic. It's a great break from the other stuff. And of course, I'd never drawn anything like Robert Crumb had drawn. So it was but I've always regarded myself as a supreme hack. I feel I can copy almost anyone's style if I'm given enough money.
Well, yeah, and the thing is,
that didn't work, but
let's learn what your kind of the capability of the people you're working with. So it's one of the reasons why you find people like to work with the same people again and again and again, is you can write less and less. But better you get to know them, the less you have to write, because you don't have to give like detailed descriptions, because you just work to their strengths, and so therefore they're going to do a good panel. So if you're doing an action panel and they're very good at action, like Lee's very good at animals and cars, basically. So like, you know, the Fair and Furious is basically, let's do cars, let's do lots of cars. And you know, then you don't have to do much. You just go, it's a nice car. And you know,
Pal, I was wondering, sorry, do you ever have to, as a colorist, do you ever have to liaise with the penciler or you know, the person who's drawn the inks?
In Lee's case, I was liaising with him all the time. First of all, because he didn't mind. Second of all, because the colors go through him anyways. If he has any feedback to say for his art, if he thinks something should be done differently, or if he thinks probably ruining his line work. So he'll come, what have you done? What have you done here? But yes, Lee and I work very closely, and also Lee's art really lends itself to close collaboration because it's so technical, it's so precise, so I can do a lot of things with it. So I need to make sure I've done the right thing with it.
The thing about Lee being so technical and precise, what's one reason he was such a great artist for Rivers of London, because for a fantastical story, you want things to look really concrete and real to give the contrast.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things. We had a few interviews just recently, and it was there was always the temptation at the start of this for me as an artist to go for the whole Doctor Strange thing, you know. Well, that's Spidey, isn't it? But that Doctor Strange stuff with the wheels of magic,
coloured fireballs bursting from his hands, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I was kind of looking forward to doing that, and then I was told that wasn't what we were doing. But it was great because I think that, you know, it actually less is more in this instance because it's a very real world. When, for example, in bodywork, the car rises out of the pond, that's really dramatic. But it's only a car rising out of the pond with a guy holding his hands up, and that's all it is. But it's by then it's hopefully so real that the drama is in the normal action of a car floating out of a pond all by itself.
Abiding by the laws of physics once they've been violated by
right.
yeah.
And just to add to that and to further answer Andrew's question, because Lee's art is so technical, there's a lot that can go wrong with it if it's not colored properly, because it can, Rivers of London, for our audience, had a house style. When I joined for the colors, there was already an established style. So I couldn't take too many liberties, for example, go too abstract on pages that aren't abstract, or go too muted on pages that required something else. So that's one reason why Lee and I liaise so much.
Great team.
Plus the fact we just like talking anyway, so
That's true. That was an excuse.
It wasn't difficult.
Well, I think it's really interesting to see.
I never had to say, don't do it like that. So, you know, I just want to clear that up.
Well, I think it's really interesting to see how this does, you know, a lot of the questions that I had prepared were, you know, really what comes first in this sort of scenario. But it seems like
lunch comes first. Ben and I have lunch and we discuss the story.
Yes, COVID has been bugger on our productivity. It really has.
Yeah, everybody's, I think. But yeah, seeing how the ideas and the components go, and then it kind of branches out to everybody that's involved in the project, and it seems to be a true collaboration. It looks like everybody works well together. And one of the questions that I kind of had was, when do you decide about using words or a picture or the other way around? Are there emotions or moments that automatically fall being just illustrated, or you know, adding the words to it to make it stronger? Where does that sort of decision come?
Oh God, that's a difficult question.
One thing, you never want to describe something that's also being drawn. You never want to duplicate what's happening.
The basic, you basically follow what's known as the voiceover rules. So you never describe something that's actually on the screen. And with Lee, you know, and Pow, you don't need to describe things. So you don't describe. So, you know, there is no panel that says like, and then Nightingale pulled the car out of the lake, to use the example that we've just been talking about. But it is, you can, if you can think of something clever, you can have like a funny counterpoint in pulling out the lake, which in that case is, you know, was where we repeat the phrase at the beginning, which is they say that life is something that happens when you're making other plans, and so is death. And then we repeat that back, and as Nightingale pulls it out, fortunately, so is Nightingale. And then it's like, then you can like pull back. And I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that at the beginning. We didn't think of that line at the beginning. We just like had that thing at the beginning. And it wasn't until we got right at the end, we went, oh my God, we can do a repeat of that. Yes, that would be brilliant. But we'd already had the sequence. We thought of that after we thought of the sequence. And then we just thought, oh my God, we can do that. And that'll be like, it will look like we did it on purpose. It will be great. A lot of the time,
sort of thing that happens in comics.
Yes. It's making things like that. The important thing is that at the end product looks like you did it all on purpose, right? But the process by which you get to the end product, a lot of it's kind of like, I don't know, color, green, something, I don't know, bananas. That's then Lee goes, I can't draw that. Tell me what to draw, something sensible.
Actually, there was a nice moment in the first one where several pages into the first episode, I think, I had trained as a wildlife illustrator and also as a technical illustrator, and they gave me the perfect page because it had these geese or ducks flying off, and behind it was the car engine. And I thought, I've never had that juxtaposition before in anything I've ever done. You know? So, about 25 years of training suddenly kicked into one panel.
Lots of ducks and lots of engines from then at that point on.
Yes. The people were hopeless, but you know, everything, the ducks and the engines, wow.
That's why Cry Fox. Andrew basically wrote Cry Fox so that we would just have nothing but foxes.
And that was a great one. I mean, all of Lee's stuff was great.
And horses. You had horses, foxes.
Yeah. I'd never drawn a horse before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You had to do it. Well, see, we wouldn't have done it if we'd known you hadn't drawn one. We would have been.
No, I keep all the things I haven't drawn very quiet indeed.
Yes.
No one will get me to do them.
So when you drew your first horse for that comic, did you do a bunch of research, or did you sort of take a crack at it?
Well, I admit I looked at photographs. Yeah, I mean, by then, actually, Rivers is the most intense piece of sustained comics work that I've done. I think it really was intensive, and there was an awful lot that I learned in the process of doing it, which I hadn't managed to learn in the previous 25 years somehow.
Don't work with Andrew and Ben. That was chiefly it.
Yeah, that was it. Actually, Andrew and I were supposed to work together hundreds of years ago, weren't we? We were supposed to do a crossover of Doctor Who and Doctor Strange.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, and it didn't happen. So, but we finally got to work together.
That would have been brilliant.
Yeah,
it would have, wouldn't it? By now, it would be a quarter-century old classic book, and but they Marvel US shut it down.
Yeah, because that would have been for Marvel UK when they had a brief flowering of autonomy and creativity. Well, they were before that they were an outlet for the American stuff, and after it they were an outlet for the American stuff. But briefly, we sort of did our own thing, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Ben, you mentioned that not being able to do these lunches during times of COVID, and several of our audience has asked how it's affected your productivity, how you've changed all of your ways that you get creative, get ideas, your work, how it's changed and affected you negatively, or in some cases perhaps positively, by changing the habits.
If I can jump in, Ben and I agreed quite early on that if you're a freelance writer without much of a social life, things didn't change that much.
Because I was fine till I caught it. I was enjoying. For the first 6 months, I actually enjoyed the lockdowns a bit, because then nobody expected you to go and do anything. So before that, I was doing loads of libraries, and I love going out and meeting people and stuff. But it does eat your writing time, and people expect you to do meetings and things. But for like 6 months, so I actually caught up. I was a bit behind. I caught up with quite a lot of work, and I was doing fine right up to the point where you actually get the Rona, and then you just go, and that's it. Then that's 2 weeks gone. So now I'm right back where I started. I managed to claw back about 2 weeks, and then I lost it again. It's terrible. But no, I'm getting to the point where I miss it now. I started missing it around November. I started to miss people.
Yeah.
So and lunch. I missed lunch and people. These are the two things I miss. I don't miss it.
Yeah.
Most of the other things, and I also miss going out and now doing the library visits and stuff. I now miss meeting people and talking to people and having a live audience. You know, it's fine, these things are Zoom, but it's just not the same as when you can stand up and take questions from people. And you know, if anyone who's ever been to one of my events knows that I like getting questions and then just rambling on for about an hour and then going home, signing some books, going home. That's basically the format. And I kind of miss it. I miss doing it. I didn't think I ever would, but now I miss it.
On the other hand, the new normal has got me religiously taking like an hour's walk every day. And that's such a great time for plotting. Like that's the best time coming up with ideas for stories is when I'm having a little walk, which was not built into my daily routine before.
It has caused a problem because I like to go to locations and I haven't been able to go to locations. So it's kind of caused it didn't for the last one, but for the current project, I haven't been able to go to look at locations and you know, I like to go and stick my nose in places and before I write about them, and I haven't been able to do that, and I'm a bit worried that I may lose some of the
mojo,
kind of smell. I always say you have to go and smell somewhere if you're going to write about it, and I kind of lose that. But I've got a couple of projects that don't actually require me to go anywhere, so I'm doing those until I can escape. And stick out, which is terrible because it's basically just around London. It's not like I want to go somewhere exotic. I just want to go down Battersea. I just want to have a look at Battersea.
Oh.
I noticed when lockdown happened for me, it didn't really change my life at all because, you know, we're just particularly people working at a screen all day long, and the comics took really long hours. But because I'd finished my run on rivers just prior to lockdown, I realized that when I was doing rivers, I never got to go out at the weekend at all. So once I was kind of away from that, I started going to coffee shops and things like that, you know, on a Saturday with my wife. It was extraordinary. We haven't seen each other for 30 years. So that's kind of, and that's gone again now. So it's which is a sadness, but there you go.
And what about you, Paul? Any changes in your routine as a result?
As Lee said, it didn't really change my routine. I tend to be quite recluse. But having said that, I have started missing conventions and events as well because for one, it's the audience, it's meeting people face to face, and people usually tend to discover me at conventions, and just having someone come over and say to you, I really like what you do, that's really inspirational, it's really motivational. And also I've met most of, at every event, I make new acquaintances and I meet new creators that also turn out to be motivation and inspiration for what's to come next. So I do miss that. Otherwise, my hermit routine remains the same.
I think that's something that we all can relate to on that one. I felt the same way, especially for like the first 6 months of lockdown. There was no change in my routine whatsoever. But it is definitely difficult to do events like this, I'm sure for all of you, where you don't necessarily get that audience feedback. I had to teach a class recently and it had no video whatsoever. So I was basically in a room alone, shouting at the wall for about an hour, and I had no idea if people were following me or if I had lost the students. I had no clue. So it's definitely a little bit disconcerting on that end. But going back, so we've talked about the collaboration. One of the things that I really find so unique about this series is that unlike so many graphic novel tie-ins that end up being basically a storyboard for TV or film, like basically it's the source material storyboarded. And that's not true of these at all, because they mostly can stand alone. What was behind the decision to like flesh out the universe outside of the books and just have it be, you know, adjacent to the books, as opposed to, you know, retreading the material in the original books on Illustrated?
It's a combination of kind of high-mindedness and vanity. The high-mindedness is that I feel like novels are novels, and I don't really, very few novels translate very well as into graphic novels, because like humor doesn't translate. The images don't look like the images that people have in their heads when they read the books. And vanity, because I always wanted to do a comic, but I didn't want to repeat myself, because I didn't want to redo the graphic novel. I didn't want to redo the books in a graphic novel format.
It would have been harder, actually, to make good comics out of the books and to start from scratch.
I think so, and it's just easier to do. It's easier to make new stories, but plus the advantage is that in the comics you can follow characters. The books are very relentlessly from Peter Grant's point of view. And this is the great advantage of the type first person, of course, is that if you don't want to write a scene, you just don't have your hero there. So if there's some like really boring thing going on, you just have someone come and say, and then this really boring thing happened, and that's great. You know, it's like 2 lines, you're done, right? But in a comic, you can follow other people. And I thought, well, what I will do is we will follow other people. We will see what else other people are doing while Peter is, you know, going around kicking ass and taking names and stuff. And plus, it just lends itself much more to, like we said, a visual storytelling technique, which is like not the same as what you want in a novel. It's a different set of sort of storytelling imperatives. And so it just seemed more sensible to do what we call interstitial, a word I got from watching lots of Doctor Who, by the way, interstitial.
That's very good.
So it works very well as interstitial. And also comics are much shorter. I mean, in terms of story per page, comics are very fast. They go past very fast. So it's good for telling little stories, the smaller stories that aren't kind of epic, great big kind of stories that have built with lots of emotional stuff. You can have quite a short, interesting little story that takes place over a couple of days. So you can kind of do the smaller cases. You can do you can do the cases where the end of the world is not going to happen during the course of the story.
And also those one-page stories as well. They were really great. I loved those.
They were fun as well. They were kind of fun. Although I ran out, and I've had to sort of like start farming them out to people, because
those were our gag strips, we call them. They're the one-page humor strips, which we did because we sort of loved. We had loving memories of stuff like that we adored when we were kids.
Yeah, but these things, they're intensive. You use up a lot of story on one page. You know, it's like, one page, I've used up all this story on one page. And you do that in the comics. You use up a lot of story. You use up a lot of I don't know, writing mojo. You use a lot of writing mojo in writing comics. And so that's one of the reasons why I write them with Andrew, because I need somebody else to provide some mojo.
Supplementary mojo. That's it.
Supplementary mojo, yes, you see. 2 mojos are better than 1. Whereas in the novels, I wouldn't co-write the novels because it would drive my co-writer mad, because my technique is so slow. But in the comics, we worked out a modus operandi. It took us a while though to work out a modus operandi that fits us very well.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we always get asked. And what it is Ben and I started writing the first comic, and each of us would write like a sequence of several pages, and so we sort of divided up the first graphic novel, sort of writing about half of it each, not in any specific order. But then what happened was we were going to continue doing that, but Ben was so enjoying writing the next one, which was Nightwitch. He kept saying, "Oh, leave me, I want to do just a bit more." So, oh, well, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to write another one. So we ended up both writing one separately, then sort of editing each other's. And that's from that point on, that's what we've been doing.
Yes. Although we do sit down, this is where the lunches came in, you see. We sat down and worked out what we would, and then we thought, right, let's formalize this. We'll have a big lunch and we will work out what we're going to do. Yeah. And that's basically what we did. He would pitch ideas at me and I would pitch ideas at him, and then we would fight and then get really, really stuffed.
I should point out at this juncture that, having mentioned Nightwitch, that Pow actually appears in Nightwitch, because I'd met her just prior to that, and she's one of the Russian girls.
Russian Nightwitches, yes.
Yeah.
I am forever
I'm gonna have to go
immortalized in the novels, thanks to Lee.
Nice to do that. He's always putting his friends in.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of leads me to something that when I asked the question, Ben, you started by saying, you know, that a lot of times readers can be disappointed if they don't look like, the character doesn't look like what's in their head,
Oh, yeah.
that sort of thing, which is, I think, primarily why so many book to TV or book to film adaptations get so controversial, because it's just not what you saw when you were reading it. But obviously you created these characters and you must have had something in mind. Did they end up looking, how much control did you have over what they ended up looking like?
I had a lot of control. I mean, because it's my IP, so I got to shout at people if they didn't do what I want. But it's not me that has to write 22 pages in a month, you see. And so therefore, there's a certain, you can't make the artist, you can't use the artist as a kind of a substitute for yourself just because you can't draw. So you get an artist who can draw, make them do it the way they want. In the end, you have to kind of like let the artist, because the artist has to do a likeness, and the likeness has to be the same page after page after page. And they have to do like 9 to 10 characters, especially in Rivers of London where you have a lot of characters. So a lot of the faces have to be recognizable. So you have to let the artist find a kind of people the way they want to draw. So Lee likes tall, thin people. If you look at everyone in a Lee comic, it's like tall and elegant. They all look like they're kind of walking down a catwalk. And that's just the style, you know, because he's not actually doing a naturalistic style. Comics are not drawn in a naturalistic style as such. It's a sort of naturalistic, but it's not photorealistic. He's not drawing a photorealistic style. And so therefore, you cannot make someone draw everything the way you want it. So you have to have a compromise. So the things that we established at the beginning was where there are a series of problems you have in comics, and you have a problem with drawing black women. Right, in comics. As anyone who's ever watched Storm evolve over the 90s, since the 1970s, right, you will know that, you know, some artists just seem to have a tremendous amount of trouble with basic African features, and you end up with a lot of white women, slightly beige white women, right? And as so, you know, so one of the things we did is we established that Lee could do that. So Lee didn't have any trouble with that. So Lee went, no, they look like this, and we look like that. So, well, for the Rivers, particularly for people like Beverly, we wanted a particular look. We didn't want like tall, skinny white women with tans, basically. and you know, and doing the hair properly and making sure the hair was depicted correctly. And this is something every time we get a new artist, we go through a process where we test this, because it's a blind spot. It's a blind spot in the industry. You know, and you've got to be careful with it. And even with like artists of color, like we use a lot of South American artists as well. Even with artists of color, they sometimes they do it that way because that's what's been expected of them for the last 20 years. And you have to go, no, it's fine. You can have women that are slightly wider and taller and stick out in different directions than the normal comic book. Well, yeah, breasts. The other one is breasts. The other one is breast. No, not that size, smaller. Especially
had discussions with Lee about that once or twice.
Yeah, we talked about breasts many times. Yeah.
The lead, who's not a large-breasted girl. Beverly's a big girl, you know, but Khalid is not. And we got one artist. It wasn't Lee, it was a guest artist. And it was like, Khalid, she had this cleavage down here. So you have someone in a hijab and a cleavage that goes down there, and breasts look like they were stuck on with glue. And we just went, no, we can't have that. That's not, you know, I know it's comic book convention, but no. So there are things like that you have to watch. And then other things you give free rein, because you do not hire talented people and then kind of do it yourself.
This is one thing that Ben's very good at, that he allows his collaborators some creative space, and you'd be amazed at how few people even think to do that. Yeah,
that's right. So I second that. It's very, very good.
I like them to have their own space because I'm lazy. It's just laziness, really. If you the less prescriptive you are, the less work you have to do. That's the view. So I try to only be prescriptive about the things that I think are actually important for the story or the overall tone, and then I try and let people have as much freedom as possible.
There was an interesting thing that happened with the evolution of how Peter looked, because we did a lot of back and forth about Peter's, features, and and it was really nuanced stuff. It was because Ben was saying, well, maybe his, I can't remember now, but things like maybe his lips are fuller or not so full, or the hairstyle and that kind of stuff. And I kept sending stuff back, and finally I managed to do something that Ben was pleased with. And then I drew the first page, which was one of the first covers used. It came out completely differently. There was nothing I could do about it, but he was suddenly there on the page as far as my mind was concerned. And then it was easy, because once you've got a picture of them in your head, you just draw it out of your mind anyway. So that was very funny. I tried really, really hard to make him look exactly how Ben wanted, and I failed miserably. He came out this tall, thin guy.
Yeah, the other thing that I didn't know is how important colorists were. See, no one had told me how important colorists, how vitally important colorists were, because I had no idea what the process of actually making a comic was, and so therefore I knew basically vaguely someone had to draw it, and at some point color got added. I didn't know there was such a thing as a colorist. And
when I grew up and I was reading comics, the colorists weren't credited. They'd say the inker, and I thought the inker was the person who did the colors. But back in those days, you had to have pencils and inks because of the printing process, what it would photograph. But yeah, so colorists have got a bad deal from the jump.
So I'm now much more kind of like interested. Oh, what's the colorist? Who's the colorist? What are they doing the colors? What's their work like? Which is something that I never used to think about before. And this has been part of the learning process of writing graphic novels, which has been fun. It's tremendous fun if you you get some leverage, and you just kind of lever people into kind of like let you do things that you have always wanted to do all your life, and you couldn't do because you can't. It's very difficult to walk in and go, I would like to write comics, and people go, ha ha ha, go away. But you got your own IP. You can go and go, I will let you have my IP if you let me draw comics. Yes, IP, and so you can do that. So I'm shameless about using my intellectual property in order to force people to let me do things. So fortunately,
because now the colorist job has become hugely important in every comic book now, because in the old days it was very, very simple coloring, and now it's just you can do virtually anything.
But everybody wants 3D shading now. Everyone wants everything.
Oh, but that's because first of all, a lot of people like you, Ben, have to realize what the role of the colorist is, because a lot of people don't know that. First of all, a colorist can make or break line work. Second of all, not all colorists know how to work with different types of line work. Different styles of line work would require different approaches, but not everyone knows how to do that, and not every editor or writer knows how to look out for that. So I was lucky, I suppose, that I started out as an artist, so switching to coloring wasn't an issue, because I already knew how to approach drawing and how to color various styles of drawing, and just generally I had, without tooting my own horn, I had visual literacy. So I knew that certain things you can't do. Little things also, as an artist, I actually had a struggle with something you mentioned, drawing and coloring features, any features that aren't Caucasian, but it's not just a point of convention or expectation. I'm mostly a self-taught artist, and when I was looking for information back in the day, there weren't any tutorials or any books, even academic books, that didn't feature just white models and white proportions and white anything. Nowadays, thanks to the internet, there's a lot of resources, and it's great, but things like difference in proportions, what makes a certain race physically recognizable, how to color black skin. For a long time, I didn't know that shadows are what defines light skin, light is what defines dark skin, and this is a very simple thing, but when no one's there to tell you, you have to figure it out on your own, and it's different, and not everyone knows to look for it.
I found this great advert for Dove, which was just a line of women, or like with light-skinned women at one end and dark-skinned women at the other. Yeah. And then I just found this, and then I could just like go an arrow, like Beverly Tiber.
And this also goes not just across races, but even across variations of body types within a race. I think Lee would agree with me. And again, because I'm an artist myself, I know that, you know, everything varies. What you're taught in textbooks really has no bearing on what you can do as an artist. For example, I never saw myself in textbooks because I'm lanky, tall, thin, bony, etc.
Lee could have drawn you.
There you go. That's why
I'm very attracted to tall women. I can't deny it.
Yeah, there you go. But every textbook told me I didn't exist. So, and even nowadays, I get people tell me, "Oh, you draw a lot of long and thin women. Don't you think this is unrealistic?" And then I get up and I say, "No, I look in the mirror." So,
Pal, would you like to reveal how tall you actually are?
6'3" and a bit.
Wow. Right, we gotta put more 6'3" women into that.
Thank you.
186. It's about 186, 187. I think we got some room for some 187.
Yeah.
We can go
my whole family is tall and lanky, and so then, you know, I opened the rivers of London and I saw tall and thin people.
My favorite was the struggling to make Stephanopoulos squat. It was just obviously fighting so hard. Like, but people are tall and lanky. Oh, Stephanopoulos is short and squat.
The thing is, I'm short and squat, and you know, it just I don't know why it's so difficult. I think I just wanted to be doing the opposite. You know, it's just the style. I mean, everyone has their kind of preferred. I have my preferred style of writing. You have your preferred style of drawing. It's like it's just the sort of like the kind of regression to the mean. It's where you go when you're not thinking about it. You just regress into. And I think it's like me, I have to keep remembering not to put Monty Python jokes into stories because Peter didn't grow up listening to Monty Python. But I want to put Monty Python jokes, and I have to force myself to kind of take out 1 in 5 of the jokes. And it's the same with thing. But you know, learning people's strengths and weaknesses is what you do, and then you get a team, and then you learn how to kind of work with the grain rather than against the grain. So you stop asking people to do things they're not very good at, and you start asking them to do things that they are good at, and then you kind of tailor. And it's been an insight for me because it now explains why, you know, certain directors will always work with the same DP. It's the same principle. They will always work with the same director or photographer because then they don't have to explain shit. They just go, you know, oh, I want it to be like that thing over there. They go, oh, they go off and they go off and do it. And then you don't have to worry about it in the same way that if I'd said to Lee, you know, I want it to be the background to be this such and such a location, and I gave him a location photograph, I didn't suddenly find he'd set it in Battersea instead of like, you know, somewhere else. He would actually do that and he could do buildings and cars and things. And like, you know, I want to, like the bloody thing for taking the van, when we talk about bodyworks, it took me ages to find a photograph of that. Find a reference photograph for the thing that pulls a car out of the river. And you think, oh, so you think the internet's infinite, but suddenly you find these kind of limitations when you're looking for things like Dutch recovery equipment and stuff. Right. Yeah, that was a bit of a challenge. That was.
And you find Dutch. Also, my favorite thing was like Dutch police tape, which is like red and black. You see, like all the different coloured police tapes, Dutch police tape is red and black, like the German tape, except it has a little Dutch fleur de lis. Like every kind of like meter or so to make sure you know it's not a German police tape, because that would, you know, that's important to the Dutch that they don't get mistaken for the German. And I love the internet for things, but you can suddenly find yourself looking for things like that and not finding them, and that can be like a real pain because you just like, I want Lee to draw this, but I can't make Lee draw something I can't find on the internet because it's just not fair.
Well, I'm quite prepared to make things up, but there's a limit to how much you can do. There's one thing I'd like to. There was a very funny moment I drew. I really didn't want to draw it really, but there was a scene where goat was engulfed in flames.
Oh, that one.
And
that was a great scene.
well, it was, but the thing was, I remember I did it, and it kind of, because I love animals, and it was terribly hard to bring myself to draw it. And then when we met up for one of those lunches, you said, I didn't know you were actually going to show it. And I thought, whoa.
Yeah, because you did like a full, I remember that, you did a full frame goat engulfed by, you know, there's the goat, flames rippling around it. I was expecting kind of like you maybe like a tip of the horns and flames coming up. That's why it was brilliant. I mean, I didn't argue with it. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant.
No, it was just very funny. It was very funny because I was convinced that's what you wanted to be the most dramatic shot on the page, and there it was.
I didn't think of it as being the graphic shot. See, that's the other thing. Your artists and your colorists will bring things to the table that you didn't even know were in the script, and you know. I mean, and Andrew's good at that because he will bring things to go, why do you do this? And things I've never even thought of. And he will say, do something like that. And I go, oh, well, it won't look good. And he goes, yes, it will. I go, okay, we put it in and it looks good. And so I've learned to listen to people when they say things every so often. You know, it's hard work though, listening to people.
It's usually more violence and nudity, which is my
Yeah,
advice.
you always want more violence and nudity. I'm always taking that like, no, nudity. And like the artists are always going, yes, everyone must do the thing with the bum and the tits.
Lee and I fought over that, I remember. He wanted less nudity. I told him he needed more nudity. And
Yeah,
That was a very difficult sequence. My difficult sex scene.
I told him I wanted it because otherwise it seemed unconvincing to me, and it totally got me out of the scene.
yeah.
And we had an argument on whether this was a valid or not.
Because I love the way it turned out. So thank you. That was in Waterweed. That was the.
Oh, is that the waterweed, the infamous waterweed nudity sequence?
Yeah, that was somewhere in Waterweed, yes.
But the problem was that in the back of my mind, my poor deceased mother might be looking at it, and I didn't know how I was going to.
Explain
You know,
it to
if
her.
I'd ever had to speak to her again about it, I'd have been sort of, oh,
We're
dear.
finding
Well, they made me do it, mother.
I find that the people that object to the nudity, the thing I get in terms of representation, the biggest problem I have is shoes. Right? I keep getting notes from people going, police women do not wear shoes like that. Those shoes are totally unsuitable. They should be flat, practical shoes.
I was objecting to someone's shoes in the sex scene, Lee, wasn't I?
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Ben, because the shoes again took me out of it.
You see, the
remember
shoes, like, no way would Stefano. The most recent one is like I made the mistake of putting some pencils out, and I got 1,000 comments saying there is no way Stephanopoulos is wearing a pair of mules like that. I don't even know what a pair of mules is, by the way. I had to look that up, and they go, so he's like, no, so you know, so I had to go back to the poor artist who'd done a very good job, and I go, can we change the shoes? And all of them, like all of Stephanopoulos' shoes, she's in every frame. Can we change all her shoes? And it's like, so, and the skirt. She wouldn't wear a skirt like that. It's like, oh God.
Well,
So-
we're unfortunately coming close to the end of our time, but I wanted to, well, first of all, thank everybody. This has been absolutely fascinating. But also, I would like everybody to close out with 3 brief questions. One is, what graphic novel inspired you most growing up, if you were into them then? If there's something that you'd like to recommend other than your own work that you find fascinating right now, and then what is coming up next for you, what we can look for and hopefully buy frequently and often.
Well, am I going first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Free for all.
Well, you can't go wrong with a bit of Alan Moore, I've always said. So I particularly liked Tom Strong, which is one of his lesser known works. So I would recommend the first Tom Strong connection. I think that's very good. That's kind of inspired me. Alan Moore inspired me, and Andrew has inspired me as for graphic artists. As for what I'm doing now, I'm writing the next novel, and the next comic has been done. And it is off at the production for Coalface being as we speak. That's Monday, which is coming up, and then the next novel is Amongst Our Weapons, and then after that, the next novella is the Reynolds novella. But before any of that happens, the Abigail novella will be out in March on both sides of the Atlantic. So you've got no excuses in all formats for everyone in every way. So there will be, because people go, oh, is it going to be on Audible? Yes, it's going to be on Audible. It's going to be in every Audible faction, on Kobo and Kindle and everything. It's going to be everywhere. You won't be able to escape it. Even in Portuguese, it's going to be in Portuguese, so you won't even be able to escape it in Brazil.
Fantastic.
I was going to say that, and it's true that I was deeply influenced by Alan Moore, chiefly the Watchmen, but I've given that answer a number of times before, and people know Watchmen, and I'd heartily recommend the TV series recently too. But instead, I'm going to recommend the comic strip Modesty Blaze by Peter O'Donnell. It went on for decades. Had a number of artists. The best of those was Jim Holdaway, but they're all worth reading because the storytelling is so brilliant. And so that's also my recommendation. It's inspired me, and it's also my recommendation. Modesty Blaze by Peter O'Donnell. And he wrote straight novels about the character too, and they're all really good, really high quality. For tooting my own horn, I write a series called The Vinyl Detective, which I heartily recommend. I'm working on the 6th book now, but do check them out. You can get them at your library for free and give them a whirl. Then if you like them, tell your friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's difficult with graphic novels. I grew up on a diet of British science fiction strips and Jerry Anderson puppet series, the strips that were based on those TV series. And I was a big fan of comics right up until Watchmen. And Watchmen I read, and I just thought, I don't need to read any more comics now, because that's just done everything you need to do in a comic strip. And I thereafter, when I was reading new comics coming out, I didn't really find them as satisfying. So I kind of stopped, I'm afraid. So that was my end point really with comics. And it always seemed like what we call a busman's holiday here, that, you know, if you draw comics a lot, I couldn't stand looking at other people's work because it's, you know, it's either too good or too bad, or you felt jealous or whatever. So I kind of stopped with comics. What I've been doing, I would like to say that the working on Rivers of London was simply the best job I ever had in comics. Very, very intense, but it was the most wonderful collaboration in the right way. And I learned so much about drawing while I was doing it, you know, on the job, you know. Yeah, horses, particularly, as we just discovered. And I'm working on now, I mean, I've been doing, since Rivers, I've been doing a lot of things that are slightly to one side from the mainstream comic media. So I've been doing concept design on a couple of TV shows, which will hopefully come to fruition, and little graphic novels and spot illustrations and box artworks for toys of the things I used to like in the 1960s. So there you go.
To take a leaf out of Lee's book, I also learned a lot working on Rivers, and it was also a perfect collaboration because of the way it was done, the way Lee did the art. I had been coloring various independent things before that, but this was the first monthly project that I was working on. So it was there was a steep learning curve in the beginning, and it was amazing. The experience was amazing. I started late with art, so I didn't actually read almost any graphic novels or comics when I was growing up, which is a horrible thing to say, but I'm catching up these days. I follow a lot of artists and a lot of artwork, but the one comics that I read religiously and was subscribed to for many years was actually Mickey Mouse, which was quite popular in Eastern Europe. And I was a huge fan of it. Everything Don Ross and Carl Barks I found hugely inspirational. And particularly the DuckTales. I didn't care much about Mickey Mouse, but Donald Duck, Scrooge McDuck, the Ducklings, they remain a favorite. And the other inspirational thing, which I'm both studying and recommending, is anything by Sergio Topi, especially his adaptation of Scheherazades tales from the Arabian 1001 Nights. He is a master, which in my opinion isn't as popular as he should be, but a master of the medium. In terms of what I'm doing, probably the best way to know is to follow me on social media. My Zoom name is my handle, or subscribe to my newsletter. I have a couple of Kickstarters coming up. I sell my art, prints, and various things on my website. And then I do commercial work and hopefully find the time to finish some pet projects. This is what the future holds for now.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, so very much.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will see all of you in some sort of tour, in some sort of personal way in the very, very near future. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you. And for everyone who attended, this is great. Thank you.